now going to blow some of the dust out of this. I've got the air compressor set up with the blower attachment here. And so I'll just blow off the chassis. I need a little more air pressure. I'm going to set the regulator a little higher. Just blow out underneath here. I'm using a small oil-free air compressor for this process. I just got this little compressor here. Really, its only job is just to blow out dust. I'll shut it off. And now we'll get the chassis back on the workbench and continue replacing capacitors. Now we're going to replace this next capacitor here. It's going to cut it off at the tube socket terminal here. And these tube sockets are actually Bakelite, and they're easier to solder to than the wafer type. With the wafer type, it can be better to just do a splice job with the old capacitor rather than trying to actually solder to the terminal itself, because you can end up damaging the terminal. But I think with this one here, we can just go right from the tube socket terminal up to the volume control. So I'm just going to bend this into a hook here and put it on here, and then I'm going to crimp it. I'm going to use the needle nose to crimp it onto the terminal so that we've got a good mechanical connection. And to hold it on there, I'm going to just temporarily attach it to the volume control there. Make sure that it's on there securely. So just put one end up on the volume control. Now I'll get my soldering iron here. Make sure that the temperature is good. Looks like it is. And solder this end of it. Just want to be careful that you don't hit any other wires with the soldering iron. So I got that end of it on there. And we'll now go up to the volume control here, and I'm going to use the desoldering wick here. I'm going to see if we can see it. There it is. I'm actually going to use the desoldering wick on the volume control to kind of create a little bit of a hole for the new lead to go in. Remove some of the old solder. So I'm just going to apply the wick to the volume control. Got some of that old solder off of there. And I'm just wasn't able to get it all off, but I got most of it, so I can just very easily go through it with the new lead. I may want to cut this. I may want to cut this a little bit shorter. And I'll just put it through here. I'm going to bend it with the needle nose. Put it through the hole. And now that it's through, I'm going to just crimp it back around there. Maybe a little bit difficult to see what I'm doing, but cut off the old capacitor lead. But I'll show you a little bit closer here in a moment what it looks like. And I'll just put some new solder on the joint. So now I've got the first two old capacitors replaced. I'm going to stop the camera and just do the rest of them because they're all pretty similar. We're able to solder right to these tube sockets because they're good quality Bakelite sockets. So I'll do that, and then we can see the results of the paper capacitor replacement, and then the next thing we'll do is the electric. I've replaced some of these capacitors here. I guess I, for a short period, didn't actually do this in real time, but I'll get the camera set back up and finish off putting in the new capacitors. Here's one thing I did, which was to use the splicing method to put in a new capacitor. What I did was to file off the old capacitor lead, just file the end of it so it's clean, and then make a U-shaped bend in it, also bend in the new capacitor lead, and crimp those two together and solder it. So I've got this new cap on. I've got all the new caps up in here. So I'm going to put the camera on the tripod now and we can keep replacing these old caps. Now I'm going to remove this one here. This one's a little bit tough to get at. Get down in here and cut this one off. And let's check what the value is here. And what you can do with these, let's see, I'll zoom out here, is to, I'm just going to melt the wax on this with a soldering iron. You've got to be careful doing this, but okay, I can see it's 0.01. So I've got another 0.01 here. And both of these caps, this one, both of these look like they go to the same point here. There's two capacitor leads. And I accidentally cut one of the resistor leads here, so I have to splice that back. I also like to keep, if I have to trim a capacitor lead and I got some lead length left on it, I like to keep those leads in case I need to use them for splicing purposes. I'm going to cut off one of these old leads here, and we'll just wrap this around the terminal here. Just going to bend a little hook there, and we'll put it on there and crimp it. These kind of terminals used in this Philco radio don't have holes to put anything through, so they're a little more, don't want the chassis to fall over, they're a little bit more difficult to work with. I'm going to try and anchor the top of this, the other lead of this capacitor on something. It may actually be easier in this case to just attach it to the tube socket end first of all. So I'm going to attach it up here. This chassis kind of wants to tip over. I'm going to attach it here. And just crimp it around the tube socket terminal. Get as good of a mechanical connection as you can. You don't want to just stick it with solder. Get it as firm on there as possible, because that'll ensure that you have a better connection. So now what I'm going to do, that I got that, okay, it's actually still kind of soft. I want to let it cool thoroughly before you touch it, because if you touch it while it's still hot, you can disturb the connection and end up with a bad solder joint. I think what I'm going to do with this resistor here is I'm going to just solder it. I'm going to see if I can solder it to the capacitor lead, because that's where it hooks up to. And before I do that though, I'm going to need to file the old lead to get any oxidation off of it. And I'm gonna just put a little crimp in the end of it here, and we'll just crimp it around this capacitor lead. And I'm gonna do this because I'm gonna need to splice it anyway. I'm gonna try and bend it into a hook there so I can get it crimped on there. And I'll put it over the capacitor lead, and then just, yeah, this can be kind of tough sometimes. It's not wanting to stay on there. Okay, come on now. See if I can get some kind of a connection on there. So I've got the resistor lead crimped on there, and we'll go ahead and make a solder joint there. Looks like we ought to have a good joint. It should still be fairly shiny when you're done. If it gets kind of hazy or starts to have cracks in it, then you might have a bad joint. You want to just resolder it. So now that I've got that done, we'll put the other end of the cap to where it goes, which is on this terminal here. And I got it crimped on there. And I'll apply the soldering iron. I like to put just a little bit of solder on the iron itself to kind of begin the bond. And then apply the solder to the terminal. It's not hot enough if when you apply solder to the terminal it doesn't start to melt. So there, that solder joint is done. And what I'm going to do is just to bend this up a little bit. Make sure I don't hit anything else. And now it looks like there's a bit of an old wire that was left on there when the new electrolytic was put on. You can see here, there's a piece, let's see if you can see it there. There's a piece of an old wire right here. So what I'm going to do is to get the needle nose on the end of the wire like this, so that it doesn't end up getting loose in there. Get in there with, see if I can do this, it's kind of tough. Try and get in there. Might just have to go in with the diagonal cutters and cut it and make sure none of those little pieces, kind of tough. Try and make sure those little pieces don't go everywhere. They kind of ended up doing that. Cut as much of it off as I can, and I'm just gonna shake this and make doubly sure that there's no little bits of wire remaining in there. So now I've got that piece of wire off of there. What I'm going to do is to replace this other cap, and I kind of have it goes down here, it goes down to this terminal down here, and I kind of have the cap bent around. But where it connects on the terminal strip is to the same point here that this cap did. So this is 0.006. I think what I've got here, I've got some 0.0047. And I think I've got some 0.001. So what I'm going to do is just parallel these caps. And when you put capacitors in parallel, the capacitance values add. So I've got the two caps here. I've got a 0.001 and a 0.0047. And so I'm just going to twist these around like this. Now ideally, of course, you just go ahead and order the exact value, but sometimes you either, and here are those capacitor leads I'm talking about. I'm going to save these because I can use them for splicing. Sometimes they either don't have the exact value